Did you know that you have a false and true self? Well, stay tuned to learn about what psychology has to say about this very intriguing and important concept. In today's video, we're going to talk about the concept of the false and true selves. Now, these are things that we've probably all thought about in some shape or form in our lives, wondering who are we really, when people are being disingenuous or fake, those kinds of things, not being true to ourselves, all of this. But actually, psychology gives us a concept, a way to conceptualize this idea in very psychological terms. And this was brought about by someone called Donald Winnicott, who was a psychoanalyst and also a pediatrician. Now, the reason why it's important to know about this concept is because it can affect us in some real important and critical ways. That is, the false self can impact us in some real critical ways. And so knowing about this concept is important for us so we can mitigate the strength, maybe I would say in some ways, of the false self, but also know how to use it to benefit us and make our lives as optimal as possible. So in the video, I'm going to explain what the false self is first, and I'll give you a bit of an example as well about how this might play out or how it's thought to play out. And then what I'll do is I'll just talk a little bit about some of the interesting aspects of this concept, which I've taken from one of the papers about this concept, and I'll leave a link to that paper in the description as well. So in the video, I'm going to give you actually quite a few examples of the way that the false self can play out and the importance of noticing it, knowing about it, being able to reflect about it in real time as well, and essentially to be conscious and aware of it, and how that might help us in life rather than the opposite, which can be quite damaging. And then I'll also explain how we might be able to access this real self a bit more. And then I'm going to leave you with a question at the end, which I'm hoping you will take some time to reflect on, having viewed the video, so that maybe you might be able to perhaps make some changes in your life, or at least to start to notice what's happening. So what is the false self, according to Winnicott and psychology? At least from Winnicott's point of view, the false self is this idea that we grow in life, in our worlds, with all of these external demands that are placed upon us. That means people like our parents, siblings, family, greater family, wider family, friends, peers, employers, academic staff, if we're studying, whatever it is, wherever we are. There's always some expectations or needs or demands that are placed upon us from other people in our lives, in our world. And so sometimes these demands go against our wishes, and we can experience difficult feelings and even conflicts about this. But, we still feel like we have to comply or even submit to the situation, to the demand. And if we don't, there'll be a negative consequence for us. And so this is where the difficulties can arise. So let me just clarify this a little bit with a bit of an example we have from Winnicott himself. So, Winnicott grew up around a depressed mother. And for a child, this is very difficult, of course. And so a child who turns to the mother, who needs the mother to support him or her emotionally and to offer that safe holding space, that secure base, when confronted by a parent who simply cannot do this or does not do this, they have to sort of come to terms with this. But it's difficult to actually accept that this is what's happening, this is the situation, because from a child's mind, for example, they would not necessarily, they wouldn't make sense of it in a logical way. It would be very much about how they feel from that rejection. And so Winnicott realized that he had to comply with this situation. He had to accept that this was the situation, that his mother was not emotionally available to him. And he may have felt quite resigned to this and actually quite rageful as well. But these would have been, these feelings, these difficult feelings would have been very hard for his real self. So he would have felt resigned to his situation, his real self would have, that is, and quite angry towards his mother, quite rageful maybe. But this couldn't be expressed directly to her, so something had to happen. And this is where the false self is erected there to help navigate, to create a kind of buffer so that the real self can be contained, can exist, but the false self will allow compliance with the mother. So rather than become rageful toward her and the impact that that can have, the negative consequences that that might have, the rejection that might have to be dealt with in a very direct and open, explicit way, one can then instead create a false self, which is actually there to defend the real self. The false self is there to mitigate, to protect the ego, to keep someone's ego intact and safe away from these demands or pressures or difficulties that are actually going on. This is considered healthy, actually. It might sound quite bad, but it's actually considered healthy because the real self needs to be protected in life. There will often be demands placed upon us where we have to do things or experience things or feel things that we really don't want to, but we can't, or we feel we can't do anything about them, because if we try to do the thing that would make us feel authentic in a situation, we would probably suffer in some way, whether that be the relationship, our work, our studies, just life in general. We would suffer if we were to be true to ourselves, be authentic. Imagine if we did that. I mean, there's a Ricky Gervais film actually where he's unable to lie, and this just came to my mind. So maybe check that out to see what might happen if we didn't have a false self. But on the other hand, it can become quite damaging as well to an individual if the false self kind of takes over too much. What I mean there is we should be, ideally, what would be healthy is to have a false self to defend and protect the real self, the true self, but also to be aware that it is there, that it is doing that. So for example, that might be, I'm not happy about this situation at work, but I will put up with it for this long because by this time I'll be able to go in this direction and that's okay with me. So you know you're doing something that goes against what you're feeling, you know, what you actually want to do, but you are accepting of it and you're aware of it, what you're doing. Now, the difficulty here can arise when a person starts to, where the false self actually sets itself up almost as the true self, and we become unaware that this is actually going on. And that's actually one of the classifications that Winnicott came up with when it comes to the false self. And so there are a few of them, and you can read about them in his paper, which I'll leave a link to. Now, one thing I want to mention about this paper, though, is to clarify that it was written in a different time. Society was different in terms of gender roles. And so there's a lot of emphasis placed on the role of the mother and how the mother actually is the one where it all begins. The mother's maybe misattunement with the child can then create this false self. That's where it starts, and it continues to protect the true self throughout life. It's important to keep in mind, you know, when theories are created, when they're written, and so how they're going to be influenced by their time. And the reason I mention this is because it's not just up to the mother to ensure that a child is feeling safe, held, and going to be psychologically healthy and emotionally healthy. It's actually up to everybody, isn't it? Everybody around the child who has some responsibility toward that child. And what I'm saying is really both parents to begin with, and anyone else who's, in some way the caregiver to that child. I mean, one example this comes to my mind when I think about this, is how even mothers themselves, if they're not being supported by the father or by those around them, what happens there is the mother has to create a false self, or a stronger false self herself, because she's feeling the pressure of the judgment and the need to comply by those around her. So the need to be this perfect supermom who must ensure that her child is emotionally and psychologically healthy and everything else that a child needs, sustenance and all the practicalities, and do all this with lack of sleep, depletion of hormones, having carried a child to term, giving birth, all of that. And then, of course, this massive responsibility. But actually what that does is mean she has to create that false self to be able to feel like she's good enough to submit and comply to the demands that are being placed upon her, even in the way of judgment. However, if everybody got involved and helped to care for the child, what would happen there is you would have perhaps a mother who is able to feel rested, able to feel supported, and in doing so maybe give the child more of what the child needs, so that the child can thrive and the mother can also feel supported. And also, even though there are categories of the false self, so it can be, the more optimal, which is where we're aware of the false self and it actually helps us in ways, it keeps us away from these harmful consequences. And when we need to comply and submit, we are doing this with more awareness generally and with more acceptance, and therefore less of a disturbance within us because of it. But there's also other classifications which are more damaging and harmful. But the good news is we can actually build or rebuild more of a connection with our real self, our true self. And essentially this is about our relationships. Now for Winnicott, it was about his relationship with his second wife and with his clients. This helped him to cultivate his true self. But I think this could be extended, right, to other people in our lives, our relationships. But of course, I think it hints there, therapy essentially can help someone to connect with their true self a little bit more. So sometimes, I'll give you an example. We may have people who call themselves people pleasers. People pleasers are often people who have, for various reasons in their upbringing, had the need to accommodate others, to please others, because for them there's a cost if they don't. And so this has become their way of being in the world. But what it also can reflect is this very low self-esteem, which is there again for various reasons. But this keeps them in a position of needing to please people. And what we often learn, sometimes too late, is that you cannot please everyone. So it's a very exhausting way of being. And what it does is it actually harms the person. Their self-esteem continues to remain, it remains low. And they're just in this kind of mode that doesn't really give them that ability to build their esteem. So with an example like this, therapy would actually be an amazing and very beneficial way for them to start to notice how disconnected they are from the true self. Not just how much, but the reasons for it. The more we start to notice this and understand this, the more we can choose whether we want to continue in this way or whether we actually are not feeling good about this, whether this is impacting our emotional and mental and psychological well-being, and actually our life, our opportunities, our relationships. And then again, that plays a role in how we feel. So in therapy, one can start to explore it, understand it, and then choose whether they're going to try something different. And in so doing, reconnect to the true self a bit more and then decide in which situations they want to use the false self to defend their interests. So in therapy, we would want to do this with you in a way that feels safe, trusting, where you can, really feel like you could explore your true self in a way where you will not be judged and you will be actually affirmed, because we all have the right to live true to ourselves, to live authentically and to express our authenticity in the world, in our lives. And so this is what we would want to work with you to do in therapy. So what I will say is, I hope you have some things there to think about when it comes to your own life. And I want to ask you a question now to reflect on. It might be good to write this down for later on if you can't do it now. But what I'd want you to do is think about in what ways your false self emerges in your life, in what aspects, in which areas of your life, in which relationships, because it might be that in some relationships it's more present than others. And what is it trying to do for you when it's there? Are you actually aware of it? Have you thought about it before consciously, or does it just emerge now that you think about it? Ask yourself these questions and then think about the reasons why this happens, and also how it impacts on you in an internal way as well. And, if there is something you want to work on, get in touch with us. But otherwise, do subscribe, do like. I say otherwise, but you can do it as well. And I look forward to seeing you, the real you, soon.